Beneath the weight of the night sky, in a city that had long forgotten kindness, a small boy wandered through the icy streets. His name was Kairo, 10 years old. A black child from Africa, alone in a place that never felt like home. His feet were bare inside worn-out shoes, and his thin body trembled beneath a torn jacket that barely reached his waist. The world had given him nothing, and yet he walked on, not to chase hope, but simply to survive one more cold hour. Kairo had no home, no warm bed, no hands to hold him. His memories were scattered like broken glass, too sharp to touch. No one knew how long he had been sleeping behind dumpsters, in bus stations, or under bridges. Each night was a silent battle against the cold and the hunger, and each morning he woke up surprised to still be breathing. The city lights flickered above him, too far away to give him warmth. People passed by, wrapped in coats and comfort, but no one saw him. He was invisible, as if he had been erased from the world's story. Yet even in his emptiness, Kairo held something many people had lost: compassion. That night, as the wind screamed down the alleyways, Kairo saw a man sitting beside a trash bin. The man was old, hunched over, and shivering uncontrollably. His clothes were soaked, his face pale, and his hands wrapped around his knees as if trying to hold himself together. No one had stopped, no one had asked. Just another soul fading. In silence. Kairo looked at him for a long time. He had nothing but the thin, ripped jacket on his back. It wasn't warm, but it was all he had. Still he walked closer. He leaned over the man, carefully removing the jacket from his own shoulders. His hands trembled not from fear, but from cold and the weight of giving. He laid the jacket over the man's back, tucking it around him with quiet care. Then Kairo stepped back into the wind. He walked away slowly, his small chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. The cold now touched his bones, but his heart carried warmth that no fire could create. That night, he gave away the only protection he had, and he did it without hesitation. The night passed slowly, dragging its cold breath over rooftops and empty sidewalks. The jacket, torn and thin, now rested on the shoulders of a man who had not spoken to anyone in weeks. His hair was matted, his shoes were torn, and his face buried beneath a blanket of dirt. But under that disguise was a name once spoken in boardrooms and broadcasted on television screens. His name was Theodore Gray. To the city, he was a silent empire. The owner of towering buildings, wide streets, and entire neighborhoods, including the one where the little boy had walked away barefoot and shivering. But wealth had not kept Theodore warm. Success had not protected his heart. After years of building and giving and losing, he had left it all behind. He chose to vanish, to become no one, in order to see the truth beneath the surface of the world he had built. What he found was not what he expected. People turned their eyes away. They locked their doors. They crossed the street. And in their silence, he had started to lose faith. Until a child with nothing offered him a jacket. No words. No questions, no fear, only action, only warmth. Only honesty. As the sun rose slowly behind gray clouds, Theodore sat still. The boy's jacket hugged his chest like a memory, and his hands stopped shaking, not because he was warm, but because something inside him had begun to burn again. Theodore knew the boy was real. He had not imagined it. The boy had left without waiting to be noticed. There had been no camera, no audience, just one boy, one jacket, one act that struck deeper than anything money had ever bought. Theodore stood. The weight of the jacket reminded him of something he had long forgotten. He began to walk, not toward comfort, but toward answers. He needed to find the boy, but the streets held no name. The alleys told no stories. And the people, when asked, only shook their heads. They had not seen a child. They had not noticed, because they had never looked. Kairo, meanwhile, had found shelter in a broken parking garage. His arms folded tightly around his body. His breath came slow and thin. His back pressed against cold cement. The night had taken. More than warmth, it had taken his strength. His hands trembled, and his lips turned blue. But he closed his eyes, and he prayed. Not for help, not for comfort, but for the old man. That he would live, that he would be warm. That the jacket would do more than his own body could. That prayer drifted through the freezing air like a whisper of faith. And somewhere across the city, Theodore Gray felt it. Though he did not understand how. By the next evening, Theodore had summoned people he once trusted. Quiet men and women who owed him favors. They asked no questions. They simply listened, then scattered through the corners of the city, looking for a boy with bare feet. A boy with skin the color of the earth. A boy who gave more than he had. But time was thin, and Kairo's body had already begun to shut down. In the silence of the night, while the world spun without him, a storm deeper than snow began to rise. It would take more than money to reach him. Now. It would take a miracle. Darkness returned without warning, settling over the city like a silent curse. The winds grew harsher. The clouds hung lower. And for Kairo, each hour became a quiet battle against pain his body could no longer resist. He had not eaten in 2 days. His stomach curled in on itself, aching with emptiness. His breath came in short gasps, each one sharper than the last. The small parking garage offered no true shelter, only shadows. Every inch of his body ached. His arms, once strong from climbing and running, now shook as he tried to sit upright. But Kairo did not cry. Tears had long been wasted in his world. With trembling steps, he rose and left the garage, pulled by instinct, not reason. His feet dragged across the pavement as he wandered toward the train station. He had heard somewhere that there were warm grates there. Sometimes steam rose from the ground, and people huddled near them for a few stolen minutes of warmth. He made it past the broken fences, past the chain-link gates and forgotten signage. No one stopped him. No one noticed. As he reached the edge of the train yard, he collapsed behind a steel column, his small body folding onto the frozen ground. He pulled his knees into his chest and pressed his cheek against the concrete. The cold crept inside him like water in a sinking ship. And then, the world began to blur. Across the city, Theodore Gray stood before a wall filled with maps and images. His team had returned with fragments, rumors of a small boy spotted near the underpass, near the parking lot, near the tracks. Nothing solid. Only shadows, but one name kept rising, a child with no last name. A boy no one claimed. A figure seen, then gone. And Theodore knew. It was him. His voice was calm, but his orders were swift. Search every station, every grate, every alley. Find him, before the night does. Back at the train yard, a woman named Lydia stepped off a bus carrying supplies. She was part of a street outreach program. Her group delivered blankets, socks, and food to the places others avoided. She had heard about the child from someone near the shelter. A whisper. A warning. She almost missed him. Just a lump near the column. But something in her heart told her to look twice. When she knelt beside Kairo, her breath caught. His skin was pale beneath the brown. His hands were ice. His lips were cracked and still. She touched his wrist, praying for a pulse. It was there. Faint. Fading. But still there. With strength she didn't know she had. She lifted his tiny body and carried him to the van. She covered him in blankets and held his hand as the driver pushed the gas pedal into the floor. Her voice was steady as she gave instructions. Every second mattered. When they arrived at the private clinic, arranged by Theodore's silent orders, a team rushed to carry the child inside. Tubes were placed. Heat blankets were wrapped. Machines beeped in rhythm with his weak heart. And behind the glass, watching, stood the man Kairo had once saved. His hands were clenched at his sides. The boy who had given him warmth now lay fighting for life. Bone thin and silent. No jacket. No name. No home. Only courage. Theodore did not leave the clinic. He waited outside the room for hours, motionless, as if his stillness could hold time and place. And just before the sun rose, Kairo moved. His fingers barely but enough. The light in the clinic was soft, like morning rain gently slipping through clouds. The world outside had already begun to move. Cars passed, doors opened, people hurried, but inside that quiet room, time seemed slower. Kairo lay beneath thick, white sheets, his small frame almost lost between the folds. Tubes ran to his hands. Monitors blinked in steady rhythm, counting every breath he fought to keep. He was alive, but not fully awake. His body had endured more than it should have. Starvation, frostbite, weakness that should have stolen him completely. But somehow something had held him to the world. A thread of unseen strength. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the promise of a stranger's eyes watching from the other side of the glass. Theodore had not moved. From his chair, he had not spoken. Not even to Lydia, who stood beside him in silence, hands folded across her chest. She had never seen the billionaire like this. Not in all the quiet stories whispered about him. There was something different in his face now, a softness, a storm, a question he could not speak. And still, his eyes stayed fixed on the boy. When the doctors spoke, their words were clear. The child was stable, but deeply malnourished. He needed time. He needed warmth. He needed rest. But more than that, he needed a reason to stay. Theodore made arrangements without hesitation. The best care, the softest bedding. Fresh clothes, simple and gentle. A warm room in a private house far from the city's noise. No questions. No press. No eyes to watch, only safety. When Kairo finally opened his eyes fully, the ceiling above him looked like heaven. White, clean, quiet. His body felt heavy, but his mind drifted between memories and confusion. He had no idea where he was. He did not recognize the walls, the sheets, or the smell of lavender in the air. But what he felt was undeniable. He was not cold. He was not hungry. He was not alone. Days passed. Slowly, carefully, Kairo began to eat again. Bits of soup, pieces of bread, warm milk that soothed his chest. He never asked questions. He never demanded answers. He simply observed, his eyes always searching, his heart always listening. One afternoon, Lydia sat beside him and showed him the jacket. His jacket. The same torn fabric he had placed around the old man days ago. Now folded neatly in her lap. Kairo stared at it for a long time. Something flickered in his face. Not pride. Not sadness. Something deeper. He remembered the man's eyes, the cold, the silence. The way he had walked away. He had given it without a name. Now it returned like a thread pulled through time. Later that evening, Theodore stood in the hallway, watching Kairo through the open door. He still had not spoken to him, not directly. Words felt too small for what needed to be said. Instead, he left something on the table. A photograph. Black and white. Faded from years. In it, a woman smiled, her arms full of books, her hair tied back. A hospital badge hung around her neck. And in the corner of the frame, a name barely legible. Alana. Kairo single quotes, S mother. Theodore walked away before the boy noticed, but a door had begun to open, and behind it waited a truth neither of them had seen coming. The sky above the house turned silver as evening arrived, quiet and cool. Clouds stretched like silk across the horizon, and the trees outside whispered softly in the wind. Inside the house, far from the noise of the city, Kairo stood at the edge of a wide window. His breath left a faint fog on the glass as he watched birds fly through the sky, free and distant. His hands, once thin and trembling, now looked fuller, stronger. but his heart still carried the silence of a child who had never been asked what he needed. Each room in the house felt like a mystery. Clean floors, soft lamps, gentle colors. But no laughter, no footsteps, no past, only echoes. Lydia had begun to help Kairo adjust, showing him where the books were, how the shower worked, and which spoon was his. He followed without words, but something in his steps had changed. He no longer dragged his feet. He walked slowly, but with steadiness, as if the ground beneath him was learning to hold him. In a room upstairs, locked and untouched for years, Lydia had started cleaning. Theodore had told her it used to be meant for someone, a child, a possibility that never came. Dust rested thick on every surface. Boxes filled the corners. Time had forgotten this room. Until now. As she moved through old drawers, her hands found an envelope, yellowed at the edges, hidden beneath a stack of documents. Her breath caught as she pulled it free. No stamp, no return address. Only one name written on the front. Theodore Gray. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single letter, written in soft, careful handwriting. Along with it, a copy of a child's intake form from an orphanage long since closed. Lydia read the letter once, then again. Her heart beat faster with every word. The letter was from Alana, a nurse, a volunteer, a woman who had worked side by side with Theodore years ago in a charity hospital for abandoned children. She had been quiet, kind, and full of hope. She had written the letter before giving birth. Knowing her time was short. She had asked for one thing, that if something ever happened to her, someone would find her son. And take care of him. She had written his name. Kairo. Lydia held the paper against her chest and stepped away from the drawer, her mind racing. The boy in the guest room. The boy with quiet eyes and scars no one could see. He was not just a child who had fallen through the cracks. He was the son of someone who had once believed in the goodness of this very house. She walked slowly down the stairs, her feet unsteady. Theodore sat near the fire, a notebook on his lap, his eyes lifted as she approached. Lydia handed him the envelope. No words were needed. His fingers took it gently, and as he read, the world seemed to stop around him. The woman who had written this letter had once been his light, a helper, a healer. She had believed in him when others questioned him. She had disappeared without warning, and he had never known why. Now he knew. She had died giving birth to a boy with her same quiet strength, a boy who had found him, not with a voice, but with a jacket. And it had taken years, cold streets, and a near-death night for their stories to meet again. Theodore closed the letter with trembling hands. He did not cry. He stood. And for the first time, he walked toward the boy, not to ask or explain, but to be near him. In the hallway, Kairo stood looking at the photograph he had found on the table. The woman in the picture. He didn't know her, but something in her eyes felt like home. The next morning arrived like a breath held too long. Light poured gently into the windows of the quiet house, brushing across the floors, the walls, and finally, across Kairo's face as he lay still beneath a thick blanket. His eyes opened. Slowly, not to fear, but to calm. For the first time in his life, waking up didn't feel like surviving. It felt like beginning. Downstairs, the house had changed. The silence remained, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full, like something waiting to be spoken. Theodore sat in the dining room, hands folded. His mind was far away, but his ears listened for small footsteps. He didn't know what to say. He only knew that something needed to be given. Not answers, not money, but something real. He had spent decades owning streets, buildings, towers that kissed the clouds. But none of it had brought him what the boy had given without a single word. That gift had peeled away everything false. And beneath it, he had found what had been missing since the day Alana disappeared. Purpose. Later that day, Theodore and Lydia guided Kairo into a car. The boy didn't ask where they were going. He only watched the city pass through the windows, his hands pressed gently against the glass. They drove past alleys, parks, and corners that had once been pieces of Kairo's world, places where he had slept, hid, starved, cried. The vehicle slowed as it reached the edge of a long, quiet street. Old buildings lined the sidewalks. Cracked signs hung above dusty doors. It was the street where Theodore had once sat in rags, the same place Kairo had given away his jacket. The same street that had never known either of their names. Until now. Car stop. Kairo stepped out slowly. The air was crisp but gentle. Ahead, a small group of workers stood near a pole. A new sign was being lifted and bolted into place. Kairo tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly as he read the letters carved in clean white metal. Kairo's Way. A silence swept through him. Beneath the sign, another plaque rested on the wall of an old building. It read, "In honor of a child who gave with nothing to gain. This street now belongs to his name. May it shelter others as he once gave shelter." Behind the glass of nearby windows, something new had taken root. A shelter. A small learning center, a kitchen. A bed for any child. With no name. All of it quietly funded, built in the silence of the weeks Kairo had been healing. And now it stood not as a gift to him, but as a legacy from him. Theodore stepped back, allowing the boy to take it all in. Kairo didn't speak. He didn't smile. He only stared at the sign until it became part of his memory. His hands trembled. Not from cold, but from the flood of something he had never known. He mattered. His jacket had not just warmed a man. It had built a street. Lydia placed a gentle hand on his back. No words were said. They weren't needed. The crowd was small, but every eye watched the boy as he walked slowly toward the building's door. It opened for him. Not because of power, not because of wealth, but because once, on a night filled with hunger, he had chosen to give instead of keep. Inside the shelter, the walls were painted soft colors. Artwork from local children filled the halls. Every room held warmth. Kairo stood in the center of it all, and something settled in his chest like the final piece of a long-lost puzzle. But far in the distance, in corners the light could not reach, shadows still moved, because not every past can be buried. And not every piece is left untouched. The days that followed were lined with softness, fresh clothes, warm meals, the quiet rhythm of books being read aloud by volunteers, and the sound of children laughing down the halls of the shelter that now bore Kairo's name. But even in the warmth, shadows sometimes crept in. Kairo slept in a bed now, surrounded by walls that didn't crumble. He had shoes without holes and water that turned warm when he asked for it. But the silence of the street still echoed inside him. The fear of waking up forgotten. The ache of giving while having nothing. The memory of the jacket he'd never expected to see again. Each night, he stared at the ceiling, listening, waiting. As if the cold might still find him. Theodore visited quietly, never with grandeur, never with speeches. He simply sat in the hallway while Kairo played with crayons or traced his finger across the frame of the plaque on the wall. It wasn't about ownership. It wasn't about image. It was about being present. But peace, no matter how deep, always ripples when the past knocks. One afternoon, an old man appeared at the shelter gates. Thin, tall, worn by time. His clothes were tattered, and his hands trembled with the weight of something more than age. The volunteers approached, cautious but kind. The man clutched a torn photograph. A woman, dark-skinned, smiling with bright eyes. He asked for the boy. He said her name. Alana. The same name etched into Theodore's past. The same name in the letter. The same name Kairo had whispered once in sleep. The man was her father, Kairo's grandfather. He had searched for years after Alana vanished. Letters unanswered, hospitals closed, orphanages dissolved. No one had told him she had died giving birth. No one had told him the child had survived. His search had ended in silence, until he read about the shelter named for a boy who gave away his only jacket. He had walked for days to find him. Lydia brought Kairo to the edge of the courtyard. The boy stood quietly, watching the old man's hands tremble. He recognized the eyes, the lines, the sorrow, the pain of waiting too long. He stepped forward. There was no embrace, just presence. 2 generations, scarred by absence, now stood within reach of one another. Theodore watched from the steps of the shelter. His hands rested on his knees, his chest heavy not with regret, but with a responsibility deeper than money. Because the boy who once gave his jacket to a stranger had unknowingly stitched together lives long torn apart. Now, the building named after him became more than stone. It became a crossing point for lost souls, for forgotten names, for broken families drawn together by kindness. And while Kairo never asked for any of it, the city moved gently around him. Children entered the shelter nightly. Volunteers followed. Programs began. Lives shifted, and far above it all, the street sign hung steady. Kairo's way. Not just a name, a reminder that sometimes the smallest act, the gift of a single jacket, can become the fire that melts the deepest cold. And somewhere in the middle of that warmth, a boy finally found his home.